This is a conversation that's happening between two people that are mutuals. Francesca Ramsey follows me and I follow her, and I'm a big fan of hers. I am also polyamorous like her, and I practice polyamory in a similar way that she does. And there's some sticking points in this conversation that I want to talk about.
I've always said that poly people are not, that's not real. Only time I've ever met a person who's poly, every single person, it's always that one of them is a fucking habitual cheater and the other person is okay with getting cheated on. Or they're a habitual cheater and the other person is tired of getting cheated on, so they make themselves okay with their spouse or their partner cheating on them. Third category is two habitual cheaters get together.
And Francesca goes over this in one of her responses to the video. I'll link all the videos below. What she's describing is not polyamory. That's cheating. And I would never be in a polyamorous relationship with a cheater, because if they're willing to lie to someone that they were monogamous with, they're probably going to lie to me about all kinds of things. Like they might lie about the fact that they're having protected sex with their other partner when they're not. See, just the tone of dishonesty there would make them not a good partner in any context. And if you're going to practice polyamory in a safe and ethical way, you need to be dealing with honest people who are not misogynistic and who have well above average communication skills. Most people, particularly most men, do not have all of those three traits. I would wager that most men are not only not appropriate for heterosexual relationships generally, but are definitely not going to be good polyamorous partners. Yeah, the no misogyny part is really important. If you ever meet a guy that you're looking to form a polyamorous relationship and they have a 1D policy, as in only one man, like you're allowed to have multiple partners, but he's the only man you're allowed to date, that's a sign of a misogynistic douchebag who's just trying to build a harem. The cheaters that this creator is describing, that's those guys. But let's first define some terms, because I've seen Black creators on TikTok Lives talking about polyamory and using the wrong terms. And I get the sense that not everybody really understands what polyamory is. So let's define some terms. I'm going to keep it very simple. Let's just talk about these four terms: non-monogamy, ethical non-monogamy, polyamory, and polygamy. Those are the terms that are most oftenly used. So let's stick with those to make it not confusing. Non-monogamy is a general term for any relationship that's not monogamous. For every relationship practice or philosophy that does not strictly adhere to the standards of monogamy, particularly as it pertains to having sex, love, or affection with only one person. Ethical non-monogamy is a relationship dynamic in which partners consent to pursue sexual and romantic connections with multiple people. Consent is the key word. You can be non-monogamous with no consent to be non-monogamous. Like I said, non-monogamy is just an umbrella term. Non-monogamy that is not practiced ethically, that would qualify as cheating if the other person isn't aware that you're non-monogamous and they think they're in a monogamous relationship with you and they're not. This happens to a lot of women. I see and hear about this, particularly women in the Black community. They think they're in a monogamous relationship and then they go to their doctor and get an STI test and find out that their husband or boyfriend, who they thought was monogamous, gave them HIV or gonorrhea or some other STI. It is actually the most common way that Black women contract HIV is through a partner whom they thought they were monogamous with. Now, polyamory, the practice of engaging in multiple romantic and typically sexual relationships with the consent of all people involved. Now, notice the difference in the terminology between ethical non-monogamy and polyamory. Francesca said that she uses these two terms interchangeably. I prefer to use words that are more precise because I like everybody to have a common understanding of what we're talking about. In the ethical non-monogamy definition, it says romantic connections with multiple people. The polyamory definition says multiple romantic relationships. Polyamory is about relationships, not just non-monogamy. And finally, polygamy, the practice or custom of having more than one wife or husband at the same time. Now, polygamy, as it is usually practiced, there is one man with multiple wives. And in the comments of this original creator's video, There were people talking about sister wives and things like that, which led me to believe that they are confusing polygamy with polyamory. Also, polygamy is usually practiced in a very patriarchal way. You very rarely see one wife with multiple husbands. But as it's usually culturally practiced, polygamy is about one man exploiting the resources of multiple women in order to have as many children, get as much domestic labor, and have as much sex as they possibly can. And usually polygamy is practiced within religious sects, and it almost always involves the trafficking of young girls. Now, I also want to discuss this bit.
Now, I think some of the things that Francesca listed as reasons why she realized that marriage was not for her and contributed to her marriage ending was the desire to have free time and alone time, and to have ability to do things on her own or venture out with her friends and not have the extreme commitment of having to do those things with a partner, right? All those things can be accomplished in monogamous relationship with the right person, right?
Her argument that you can have time on your own and all the things, the reasons that Francesca gave for being non-monogamous, that you can have these things in a monogamous relationship. But you can't. In many cases, I would venture to say in most cases, you can't, and I'll explain why. It's because of men's main character syndrome and the desire for them to be centered at all times. Because there's a cultural expectation in heterosexual monogamous relationships, particularly marriages, that there's a certain amount of care that a wife or a girlfriend has to do for a husband or a boyfriend. And that expectation leads to the man in the relationship, consciously or unconsciously, depending on their wife or girlfriend to do a lot more things for them, even things that they did for themselves while they were single. Things like cooking, housework, other domestic chores. If children come along, the bulk of the child care usually falls on us, whether we work outside the home or not. What I'm saying is, in a typical heterosexual relationship, a typical one, the amount of emotional labor a woman has to spend just to maintain that relationship and to deal with that man takes up so much of her head, so much of her time with the actual labor, that there's very little time left over for herself. Which is why this whole movement about decentering men, that's what we mean. We mean deprogramming yourself, getting rid of the notion that men, the pursuit of men, the service of men, the consideration of men in your day-to-day life above your own needs and concerns. We need to get ourselves out of that habit. We have to deprogram ourselves to center ourselves in our own lives instead of center the men in our lives. That's what I found to be true in my marriage. There's just so much mental energy I spent just managing, like, is he going to be in a good mood today? Is it something I'm going to say going to piss him off? You know, I'm having this thing where I'm having a need that's not being met, but I don't want to bring it up right now because it's Friday and I don't want to ruin the weekend, because if I bring it up now, the whole weekend will be about this. And then I'll have to go back to work Monday and I will never really get a mental break from anything. It was exhausting. Yeah, so that's why I'm thinking that it's not always possible to have that in a typical heterosexual relationship. So yeah, let's start with using the right terms and understanding that the way patriarchy presents itself, rears its ugly head in heterosexual relationships, makes leading any kind of independent life really, really difficult, particularly if you're a woman. The idea that we're supposed to cleave unto each other and be each other's everything is very deeply ingrained in our culture surrounding marriage and heterosexual relationships in general. And men tend to create so much extra labor, both physical and emotional, that living a full, well-rounded life with your own friends and your own stuff going on, traveling on your own, etc., it can be very difficult in a typical relationship. And the desire to seek experience and connections, even if they're not sexual, outside of your marriage, tends to make the average man very insecure. Bottom line is just, I'm going to need everybody to stop talking about things they know nothing about and maybe learn a little something about those things and use the proper terminology when you're discussing those things. Because when people don't do that, that's what I find very frustrating. So if you don't know exactly what you're talking about, and if you're not using the proper terminology, I would appreciate it, kindly, this is stated with love, I would appreciate it if you would keep polyamorous people's names out your mouth. Thanks.